farmer lived alone for years, until he bought the last Apache woman left behind. Wild West stories. The wind often whispered through the branches, carrying with it stories of a world beyond the valley. But Samuel had little interest in the world outside his farm. He preferred the quiet, the solitude, and the rhythmic work of tending his land. For years, he had spoken to no one except passing travelers or the occasional neighbor who needed help fixing a fence or hauling a load of hay. Samuel was a tall man with broad shoulders, hands calloused from decades of hard work, and a face etched with lines from sun, wind, and long winters. His hair had begun to gray, and his once dark eyes carried a calm steadiness, shaped by years of living with little more than his thoughts and the land. Despite his solitude, there was a certain peace in his life. He woke early, fed the animals, checked the crops, and repaired anything that needed mending. The farm kept him busy, but sometimes in the long evenings he would sit on the porch, staring at the horizon, and wonder what life might have been like if he had not lived alone for so long. Though Samuel preferred life in isolation, it had not always been this way. He remembered a time long ago when laughter and family had filled his home. His wife, Margaret, had passed many years before, and their young daughter had gone to live with relatives after Samuel had decided he could not manage both farm and child alone. Those memories lingered in the corners of his mind, soft reminders of what he had lost. Over time, Samuel had buried the ache of loneliness beneath layers of routine and work. The farm became his companion, and the animals were the only company he truly needed. The town of Dry Creek was small but bustling in its own quiet way. A few dozen families lived along the dusty streets, their wooden homes and modest shops forming a close-knit community. They relied on each other for supplies, news, and the occasional social gathering, but Samuel had always been different. While others would gather for dances, town meetings, or Sunday services, he remained on his farm, content to watch from a distance. People said he was gruff, perhaps even cold, but in truth, he was simply a man who had learned to find comfort in his own company. Life on the prairie was not easy. Winters were harsh, with biting winds and snowdrifts that could bury the fields in a single night. Summers brought relentless heat, insects that swarmed without warning, and the constant threat of fire. Samuel had endured all of it, learning to read the skies, tend the animals, and coax life from stubborn soil. Each day presented a new challenge, and he met each one with patience and determination. In many ways, the farm had become a reflection of his own character, resilient, steadfast, and quietly enduring. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Samuel rode into town to trade some of his surplus crops for supplies. The streets were alive with activity, though nothing ever seemed to change in Dry Creek. Children played in the dust, women exchanged news at the market, and men repaired wagons or mended fences. Samuel's presence was noted but barely remarked upon. He greeted a few townsfolk politely, exchanged the usual nods and handshakes, and made his way to the general store. Inside the store, the familiar scent of dried herbs, leather, and wood smoke greeted him. Old Mr. Thompson, the storekeeper, stood behind the counter, polishing a set of iron tools. "Evening, Samuel," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "How's the farm?" "That's what I expect from you, but I did hear something today that might interest you." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "There's an Apache woman being held near the trading post. The government's looking to sell her, claim her as property. Seems she's the last one left from her family after all the conflicts." He had heard stories like this before, stories of families torn apart, lives uprooted, and communities destroyed. He had seen the consequences of conflict, even if from a distance. But this was different. This woman was alone, abandoned, and vulnerable. Something inside him stirred, a mix of curiosity, compassion, and a strange sense of responsibility. He had lived alone for years, and the thought of helping someone, even a stranger, seemed almost foreign. Yet the idea lingered in his mind like a persistent shadow. "Do you know her name?" Samuel asked cautiously. "Not exactly," Mr. Thompson replied. "They call her Nakamis. Quiet, strong, and wary of everyone. She's been through a lot. Folks say she won't trust anyone easily." Could someone like him, a solitary farmer, make any difference in her life? Sleep did not come easily. Samuel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the loneliness and fear that Nakamis must feel. He had known loss and hardship, but nothing compared to what she must have endured. The idea of bringing her to his farm, of offering her a safe place, began to take shape in his mind. It was not a decision he made lightly. He knew the challenges that lay ahead: language barriers, cultural differences, and the townspeople's inevitable curiosity. Yet he felt a quiet resolve growing within him, a sense that this was something he was meant to do. Over the next few days, Samuel made preparations. He repaired a small cabin on the edge of his property, stocked it with blankets, food, and simple comforts. He gathered tools, firewood, and provisions, imagining the day when Nakamis might arrive. Each chore he completed brought a sense of purpose that he had not felt in years. For the first time in a long while, Samuel felt anticipation rather than routine. He wondered how she would react, what stories she might tell, and whether they could find common ground despite the vast differences in their lives. When he finally made the journey to the trading post, Samuel felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The ride through the prairie was long and quiet, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. He thought about the conversations he might have, the gestures of trust he would need to make, and the patience required to help someone heal. He also thought about himself, about the loneliness that had defined so many years of his life, and the possibility that it might soon change. At the trading post, he saw her for the first time. Nakamis stood a few feet away, her eyes alert, her posture guarded. She was smaller than he had imagined, but there was a strength in her presence that commanded respect. She watched him carefully, wary of his intentions. Samuel felt a pang of empathy and silently vowed to earn her trust, no matter how long it took. The moment was quiet but charged with possibility. Samuel extended a hand in greeting, and Nakamis hesitated, her gaze unwavering. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. Yet, in that instant, a fragile connection began to form, a silent understanding that they were both, in their own ways, searching for something beyond solitude and loss. And so, the story of Samuel Hayes, the lone farmer, and Nakamis, the last Apache woman, began. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the quiet power of human compassion. For Samuel, it marked the end of a long era of solitude. For Nakamis, it offered the first glimmer of safety and trust in a world that had often been unkind. Together, they would face the challenges of the frontier, learning from each other, and slowly building a life neither could have imagined alone. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, a vast expanse of possibility. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel felt a warmth he had not known in years. For the first time in a long while, he felt that life could be more than survival, that it could be shared, meaningful, and perhaps even joyful. Samuel rode into the dusty clearing where the trading post sat. The wooden building looked weathered, its paint chipped and faded from years of sun and wind. He tied his horse to a post, the leather reins creaking softly. The sound of voices reached him from inside, a mixture of merchants, travelers, and a few townsfolk trading goods. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Today was not a normal day. Today, he would meet Nakamis, the last Apache woman remaining from her family, and he intended to bring her to safety. Inside the trading post, the air was thick with the scent of dried herbs, leather, and the faint aroma of wood smoke. Samuel spotted Mr. Thompson behind the counter, busy arranging sacks of flour and sugar. Near the back of the room, a small, quiet figure caught his eye. Nakamis stood slightly apart, her hands folded in front of her, her dark eyes alert and wary. Her long hair was tied back and her clothes were simple but neat. Samuel's heart tightened at the sight of her. She looked fragile, yet there was an unmistakable strength in her posture, a sense that she had survived far more than anyone could imagine. Samuel stepped forward carefully. "Hello," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm Samuel Hayes." Her gaze remained fixed, as if measuring him, testing his intentions. Samuel felt the weight of her distrust but did not let it deter him. He had learned in life that trust had to be earned, not demanded. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Samuel, this is Nakamis. I understand you wish to take her to your farm. A home where she won't have to fear anyone." The government officials at the trading post treated Nakamis as property, discussing price and payment in cold, mechanical terms. Samuel felt a pang of anger and sadness. How could they see a living person as a thing to be bought and sold? But he kept his composure. He paid what was required, ensuring that her transfer would be legal and above board. Nakamis watched silently, her eyes cautious but observing everything, as if noting Samuel's character before she could trust him at all. When the formalities were complete, Samuel motioned toward the door. "Shall we go?" he asked gently. Nakamis did not move at first. Samuel could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. This was not just a new place, it was an entirely new life. After a long moment, she nodded slightly, her small gesture signaling a quiet acceptance. Samuel offered her his hand, not to pull her forward but as a gesture of reassurance. She did not take it, but she did not step back either. That was enough for Samuel. The journey back to the farm was long and quiet. Samuel rode beside Nakamis on horseback, giving her space while remaining nearby. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden grasses swaying in the wind. Birds called from distant trees and the occasional rabbit darted across their path. It was a landscape of beauty, but also one that could be unforgiving. Samuel thought of how this land had shaped him, teaching him patience, resilience, and respect for the natural world. He hoped it could offer the same lessons to Nakamis. At first, Nakamis said nothing. Her eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert to any movement, any potential threat. Samuel understood. She had survived in a world that had been cruel to her people. Caution was a necessity, not a habit. He respected her silence and did not press her to speak. Instead, he shared small things about the land, where the streams ran clear, which areas were safe to cross, and how the wind could signal coming storms. His voice was steady and calm, a grounding presence in the vast openness of the prairie. As they traveled, Samuel noticed subtle signs of her curiosity. Her eyes lingered on certain trees, on the way the sunlight played across the fields, and on the shapes of distant hills. Occasionally, she pointed to a plant, a bird, or a small animal, asking its name. Samuel answered patiently, teaching her the names of things, showing her the ways he had learned to read the land. Small interactions like these began to break down the walls of mistrust. Nakamis still held her guard, but she was beginning to see that Samuel's intentions were genuine. The first night on the journey, they camped beneath a grove of cottonwood trees. Samuel built a small fire, careful to keep it low and controlled. Nakamis helped gather kindling and water, her movements quiet and precise. They shared a simple meal of bread and dried meat, sitting a respectful distance apart. Conversation was sparse, but the silence was not uncomfortable. For the first time, they shared space without fear, each learning to observe and understand the other. That night, as Samuel lay beneath the stars, he thought about Nakamis and her past. She had lost everything, her family, her community, her freedom. And yet here she was, surviving, alert and strong. He admired her resilience and felt a growing sense of responsibility. She was not just a person to care for. She was a human being with a story, with courage, and with the right to live safely and freely. Over the next several days, the journey continued. Samuel and Nakamis fell into a quiet rhythm. Each day brought small victories, a safe crossing of a creek, a warm meal, a shared laugh at some minor mishap. Nakamis began to speak in short phrases, asking questions about the farm, the animals, and the work that needed to be done. Samuel answered patiently, careful not to overwhelm her. He found that teaching her about the farm gave them common ground, a shared purpose that slowly built trust. One afternoon, as they rode through a narrow valley, a sudden gust of wind kicked up dust and loose leaves. Nakamis instinctively ducked behind Samuel's horse, and he instinctively reached to guide her, a simple act that spoke volumes. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and for the first time Samuel saw a flicker of something beyond caution, relief, perhaps, or even gratitude. It was a small moment, but it marked the beginning of a connection that would grow stronger with each passing day. By the time they neared Samuel's farm, Nakamis had begun to relax slightly. Her posture was less tense, her eyes less constantly scanning for danger. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and hope. The farm represented safety, stability, and the chance for a new beginning. He hoped that, once there, she would begin to see it as more than just a place to survive, but as a home where she could reclaim a sense of normalcy and belonging. When they arrived at the farm, Samuel led Nakamis to the small cabin he had prepared for her. It was simple but comfortable, with a sturdy door, a fireplace, and enough supplies to last several weeks. Nakamis stepped inside cautiously, examining every corner. Samuel gave her space, allowing her to explore at her own pace. She touched the walls, opened the cupboards, and finally sank onto a chair near the window. Samuel watched quietly, noting the way she seemed to absorb the surroundings, slowly realizing that she was safe for the first time in a long while. That evening, they shared their first meal in the cabin. Samuel had prepared a simple stew with fresh vegetables and meat from his farm. Nakamis ate slowly, still cautious, but there was a sense of comfort in the act of sharing food. Samuel spoke gently, telling her about the farm, the animals, and the life they would build together. He did not push her to respond, but he hoped that over time, she would see that she could trust him. As night fell, Samuel stepped outside to check on the animals and the perimeter of the farm. The prairie stretched out before him, bathed in silver moonlight. He thought about the journey, about Nakamis, and about the life that lay ahead. It would not be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of fear. But he also knew that together, they could face whatever came. He felt a quiet sense of purpose, a feeling he had not experienced in years. For the first time, Samuel Hayes did not feel entirely alone. Nakamis watched him from the window, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the faint glimmer of moon above. Though she had not yet spoken much, she sensed the sincerity in Samuel's actions, the quiet strength of his character, and the promise of safety he offered. She had been through so much, and the world had not always been kind, but perhaps, just perhaps, this farm could be a place where she could begin again. And so, the first days together passed slowly, filled with quiet observation, small gestures, and the tentative beginnings of trust. Samuel and Nakamis had taken the first steps toward a life that neither had expected, a life that would require patience, understanding, and courage. But for the first time in years, the prairie did not feel empty. It was a space of possibility, of connection, and of the fragile hope that even the most wounded souls could find peace and companionship in an unforgiving world. The days passed slowly at Samuel Hayes' farm, but each one brought subtle changes. Nakamis, once silent and wary, began to find small comforts in the routines of farm life. She moved with a quiet grace among the animals, learning their habits and noticing the patterns of the land. Samuel watched her closely, impressed by her natural skill and sharp instincts. It seemed that survival had honed her senses in ways he could never have imagined. Even the smallest gestures, like the careful way she handled a frightened horse or the way she prepared vegetables, revealed a deep knowledge and understanding of life that went far beyond what Samuel had expected. Samuel himself found the days more fulfilling than he had in years. Teaching Nakamis about the farm, how to mend fences, tend to the animals, and work the fields, gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He discovered that he enjoyed showing her the practical details of farm life, not because she needed instruction, but because it created moments of shared effort, a connection built not through words, but through actions. Even the simple tasks of carrying water from the well or stacking firewood became opportunities for companionship. Nakamis was cautious at first, her movements careful, her eyes alert. But gradually she began to ask questions. "What is this?" she would ask, pointing to a tool or a plant, her voice soft but curious. Samuel answered patiently, explaining the uses of various implements and the habits of the crops. Sometimes she would shake her head in disbelief, marveling at the way he had managed the land for so many years. Other times she offered suggestions based on her own knowledge, ways to protect plants from pests or to improve irrigation. Samuel listened carefully, realizing that her insights, born from a lifetime of observing nature closely, were often better than his own methods. Their work together became a rhythm, unspoken but deeply understood. Mornings began with feeding the animals and checking the crops. Afternoons were spent repairing fences, tending gardens, or mending tools. Evenings were quiet, filled with small conversations or comfortable silence by the fireplace. They shared meals, simple but nourishing, and gradually began to learn the small details of each other's lives. Nakamis would hum softly while working, a sound that Samuel found comforting, though he never asked her to explain it. She, in turn, watched him with careful curiosity, noting his habits, his attentiveness, and the way he treated the land with respect. One afternoon, Samuel introduced Nakamis to the animals he had raised since childhood. There were cows grazing in the pastures, chickens clucking in the yard, and a pair of horses that had become his constant companions. Nakamis approached them slowly, her hands outstretched but cautious. She spoke softly, calming the animals with a few words and gentle gestures. Samuel marveled at how naturally she adapted to the farm, her presence both soothing and confident. As the days turned into weeks, Nakamis began to share fragments of her past. She spoke of her family, her people, and the land she had once called home. Her voice was often tinged with sadness, but there was also a quiet pride in her words. Samuel listened carefully, never interrupting, offering comfort through his presence rather than his speech. He realized that the stories she shared were not just memories, they were a way for her to hold onto her identity in a world that had taken so much from her. In return, Samuel shared small stories of his own life, though less about people and more about the land. He spoke of the seasons, the changes in weather, and the ways he had learned to survive. Nakamis listened with interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed her sharp mind and curiosity. These exchanges, though simple, created a foundation of trust and understanding between them. They were learning not only about each other, but about the ways their worlds could connect despite the differences in their histories. One morning, after a heavy rain, Samuel took Nakamis to the fields to inspect the crops. The soil was rich and dark, the young plants glistening with droplets of water. Nakamis knelt beside them, her fingers brushing the earth, and smiled faintly. "The land is good," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "Yes, it is, but it needs care and patience like all good things." He realized that Nakamis was not only a survivor but also a teacher, someone who brought new knowledge and perspective to his long-practiced routines. Evenings became a time for quiet reflection. Samuel would sit by the fireplace, repairing tools or carving wood, while Nakamis prepared food or tended the small garden outside the cabin. Sometimes they spoke, other times they simply shared the warmth of the fire. Slowly, Nakamis began to relax in his presence, her movements less guarded, her voice more confident. She still observed carefully, but there was a growing sense of trust, a recognition that Samuel was not a threat, but a companion who respected her and valued her knowledge. One afternoon, as Samuel repaired a broken fence, Nakamis approached with a small bundle of herbs. She had collected them from the surrounding prairie and offered them to him. "For cooking," she said, her voice soft but certain. Samuel took the herbs, inhaling their earthy aroma. "Thank you," he said, smiling. These will make a fine meal." It was a small gesture, but in it, Samuel sensed a bridge forming between them. Acts of care, no matter how small, were becoming their language. The townspeople, at first curious about the unusual pairing, began to notice the changes in Samuel. He was no longer the solitary man who kept to himself. There was a quiet energy about him, a sense of purpose and connection. Some of the neighbors came by to offer assistance, bringing supplies or checking on the farm. Nakamis greeted them cautiously, but with a growing confidence, and they began to respect her for the strength and wisdom she displayed. Through the weeks, Samuel and Nakamis faced challenges together. Storms tested their resolve, unexpected animal sicknesses demanded quick thinking, and the isolation of the prairie reminded them that life was often unpredictable. Yet, each challenge was met with patience, cooperation, and a growing sense of unity. Nakamis taught Samuel new ways to read the land, and Samuel offered guidance on managing the farm's demands. Together, they found solutions, relying on each other's strengths and learning from each other's experiences. By the end of the month, a transformation had taken place. Nakamis was no longer simply a visitor or a survivor. She was a partner in the life of the farm. She moved through the land with ease, her knowledge and instincts guiding their daily routines. Samuel, in turn, found a new depth of companionship, realizing that life shared with another human being was richer, more fulfilling, and deeply rewarding. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Samuel and Nakamis stood side by side in the fields. The work of the day was done, and the farm lay quiet around them. Nakamis looked out at the landscape, her eyes thoughtful. Samuel sensed her reflecting on how far she had come, from a life of fear and uncertainty to a place of safety and purpose. He did not speak, letting the silence convey his own appreciation for her courage and resilience. As darkness fell, they returned to the cabin, sharing a simple meal and sitting by the fire. The warmth of the flames mirrored the growing warmth between them, a bond formed not through words alone, but through shared effort, trust, and understanding. Samuel realized that in teaching Nakamis about the farm, he had also learned about patience, respect, and the strength that comes from truly caring for another person. Nakamis, in turn, had found a space where she could begin to heal, where her past did not define her, and where she could contribute her knowledge and skills without fear. The farm had become more than a place to survive. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a place of learning for both of them. The prairie, vast and untamed, stretched endlessly around them. Yet within its wide expanse, Samuel and Nakamis had found a sense of order, of purpose, and of connection. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow closer, to understand each other, and to build a life that honored both their pasts while looking forward to the future. In those quiet weeks, the foundations of trust and respect were laid. Samuel Hayes, the once lone farmer, and Nakamis, the last Apache woman, had begun to forge a partnership built on patience, understanding, and shared effort. The farm had become a place of possibility, a place where two people from vastly different worlds could find companionship, purpose, and hope. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Samuel felt a sense of peace he had not known for many years. Nakamis, sitting nearby, hummed softly as she worked by the firelight. Together, they faced the quiet night, the challenges of the land, and the promise of a future that neither had dared to imagine before. The bond between them, fragile but growing, was a testament to the power of human resilience, kindness, and the ability to find connection even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The seasons continued their slow, steady march across the prairie, and life on Samuel Hayes' farm became a rhythm of shared work, quiet reflection, and small joys. Nakamis had grown more confident with each passing day, moving through the farm as naturally as Samuel had once done alone. She tended the animals, cared for the garden, and maintained the cabin with meticulous care. In her quiet way, she had become the heart of the household, bringing a sense of life and energy that had long been absent. Samuel, too, had changed. The solitude that had once defined him felt distant, replaced by a warmth and satisfaction he had not known for many years. Teaching Nakamis, learning from her, and sharing the burdens of farm life created a bond stronger than either had expected. Together, they faced the challenges of the land, from harsh storms to stubborn crops, always relying on patience, skill, and cooperation. Each day, their connection grew, rooted in shared effort and mutual respect. The community of Dry Creek Valley began to notice the transformation as well. At first, neighbors were curious and cautious, uncertain how to regard the unusual pairing of a solitary settler and an Apache woman. Some whispered, some watched from a distance, and a few even questioned Samuel's decision. But as weeks turned into months, people began to see Nakamis not as a stranger, but as a capable, kind, and intelligent woman. She helped tend to animals, assisted with farm work during town projects, and even offered her knowledge of local plants and herbs to neighbors in need. Slowly, respect replaced suspicion. Nakamis' quiet strength became evident to everyone who met her. Children were drawn to her calm presence, the way she handled animals, and the soft hum she sometimes sang while working. Townsfolk began to rely on her knowledge, seeking advice on remedies for illness or guidance for planting crops. Through her actions, she built bridges between her past and the lives around her. She had survived unimaginable hardships, yet her presence brought hope, practicality, and wisdom to those she touched. Life on the farm, though full of work, also brought moments of simple joy. Samuel and Nakamis would walk together along the ridge above the fields at sunrise, watching the prairie light up with gold and amber hues. They learned to read the subtle changes in the sky, predicting weather and understanding the land in ways that only came from experience. At times, they would sit by the stream, skipping stones or listening to the gentle rush of water, sharing thoughts without the need for many words. In these moments, the bond between them deepened, quiet and steady, like the prairie itself. One day, Samuel invited Nakamis to help with a new project, planting an orchard. He wanted to establish something that would grow over years, a lasting testament to their shared life. Nakamis smiled at the idea and suggested ways to care for the young trees, using her knowledge of soil, water, and natural protection. Together, they planted saplings in neat rows, their hands moving in harmony, each action strengthening their connection. As the trees took root, so too did their lives intertwine, each day growing stronger and more resilient. Evenings became a time for reflection and conversation. Samuel shared stories of his childhood, of the land, and of his life before solitude became his companion. Nakamis, in turn, spoke more freely about her people, their traditions, and her dreams for the future. Their conversations were never rushed, and they listened as much as they spoke, learning the rhythm of each other's thoughts and emotions. Trust had grown into understanding, and understanding into genuine companionship. The challenges of farm life never ceased. Harsh winters brought snow and ice, threatening the animals and crops. Summers were hot and dry, requiring constant attention to irrigation and the well-being of the land. But Samuel and Nakamis faced each obstacle with cooperation and resilience. They learned to anticipate one another's needs, to share labor without complaint, and to find solutions through collaboration. Each challenge overcame strengthened their bond, creating a partnership built not only on necessity but on respect, care, and shared purpose. As the farm prospered, so did their relationship. Samuel admired Nakamis not only for her strength and skill but for her wisdom and insight. She had survived great hardships, and yet she faced each day with determination and calm. Nakamis, in turn, respected Samuel for his steadfastness, his patience, and the quiet kindness he had shown her from the moment they met. They learned to complement each other, balancing strengths and weaknesses and discovering the power of shared effort. The town of Dry Creek eventually came to accept and even admire their partnership. Neighbors who had once been wary began to seek Nakamis' advice, appreciating the way she combined practical knowledge with empathy. Samuel, too, was seen in a new light, not just as a solitary farmer, but as a man capable of great kindness, patience, and vision. Together, they became an example of how understanding, trust, and cooperation could bridge differences and bring people together in meaningful ways. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air carried a crisp chill, Samuel and Nakamis walked through the orchard they had planted. The saplings swayed gently in the breeze, a promise of growth and continuity. Nakamis touched the bark of one tree, smiling softly. "They will grow strong," she said. Samuel nodded, "just like us." There was laughter, gentle teasing, and the occasional pause for thought. Through it all, a deep sense of contentment filled the space between them. They had come far, from strangers bound by circumstance to companions bound by choice. The animals thrived, the crops flourished, and the farm became a place of stability and hope. Nakamis' presence brought balance, knowledge, and care, while Samuel's guidance and steadfastness created structure and security. Together, they had created more than a farm. They had created a home, a sanctuary where life could be nurtured and shared. Over time, Nakamis shared more of her heritage, teaching Samuel about the natural remedies her people had long used, the importance of observing the land, and the wisdom of patience. Samuel, in return, showed her the tools, techniques, and traditions of settler life, creating a fusion of knowledge that benefited both. They discovered that learning from one another enriched their lives and gave them a deeper appreciation for their respective cultures. Even the children from the town began to visit the farm, curious about Nakamis and the work she and Samuel were doing. They watched as she fed the animals, tended the garden, and cared for the land with a quiet confidence. Samuel noticed that the children were learning more than just farming. They were learning respect, patience, and the value of cooperation. Nakamis, once isolated and wary, had become a teacher in her own right, guiding the next generation with care and wisdom. As the years passed, Samuel and Nakamis grew inseparable. Their bond, forged through shared labor, patience, and understanding, became a source of comfort and strength for both. They faced hardships together, celebrated successes, and shared the quiet beauty of the prairie. The farm, once a place of solitude for Samuel, had become a living testament to resilience, trust, and the power of human connection. One evening, as they stood on the ridge overlooking the fields, Samuel turned to Nakamis. "I never imagined life could be like this," he said softly. Nakamis smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. "Neither did I," she replied. "But together we have found a place where we belong." The farm, nurtured by the hands and hearts of Samuel and Nakamis, thrived as a symbol of hope, patience, and the quiet strength of shared life. They had begun as strangers, brought together by circumstance, and had grown into companions who trusted, respected, and cherished one another. In their partnership, they had discovered not only survival but a life filled with meaning, connection, and enduring hope. Even as the seasons changed and the years passed, Samuel and Nakamis remained steadfast. Their story, built on the foundations of trust, respect, and cooperation, was one of quiet heroism, proving that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, compassion and understanding could create a life of beauty, purpose, and belonging. And on the prairie, under the endless sky, they found peace, companionship, and the enduring joy of a life truly shared.